There's a 3-artist exhibit opening tonight at the R2 Gallery in the Launchpad called CrossCurrents. And those 3 artists are with me now in the studio on today's Express Yourself. Lynette O'Kane joins me now. Hi, Lynette.
Hi, Luke.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So strange to see you on the other side of the mic.
I know. Switch roles here.
Yeah. Also with us are Meris Barreto. Hi, Meris.
Hi.
Welcome to KDNK.
Thank you.
And Wendy Prellwitz joins us too. Hi, Wendy.
Hey, nice to be here.
Welcome to KDNK and Carbondale. Well, Lynette, the little blurb about this looks very interesting. Why don't we start there? This exhibit visually articulates the seemingly random animations of wind and water while exploring underlying patterns and themes to this apparent chaos. I know this exhibit is your baby.
This exhibit is.
So what does that mean?
Initially, I planned to curate an exhibit with Meris, and the word that we used was vagaries. We got in a discussion about how our lives and our work take these tangential side paths, and yet at times you get the bird's eye view and you start to see underlying patterns. And I think there comes a point in your life where you start to understand that maybe those side paths weren't diversions at all, but they were really part of the main theme. And so we decided to do a 3-person show. Meris and I go back to high school, and Meris and Wendy went to college together. Wendy and I are newer. But again, these divergent paths in our lives and divergent paths in our work, the work is kind of two-leveled. The level that I would like to discuss the most is the cross currents about patterns. Maybe even I would go so far as to say influenced by the chaos theory, that dynamic systems do have an underlying order, and that small changes in directions can result in very large changes. My work, and I would say Meris's work, explore the ideas of wind. Meris has an installation that involves tumbleweeds that she can describe more. My work is influenced by weather patterns and clouds, particularly influenced by the landscape of the San Luis Valley, which, as you know, is becoming my second home. And there you have this basically 360-degree view of the horizon, and the different weather systems that you see there can change, and then there's this huge bowl of sky above you. Wendy's work deals with the patterns of water and currents, and so all of this has to do with patterns and movement.
So a year ago, you came up with this idea, and all 3 of you sort of thought about it and processed it and created works around that idea? Is that kind of how it works?
I would say that's accurate. I would also say the second part I was going to talk about the work is one of the working titles for the show was Surface and Texture. And I think all of us are very interested in materials and texture. So I just want to throw in that that's always been there. But yes, I would say we work toward that theme.
Meris, Lynette mentioned your wire tumbleweeds. Tell me about your wire tumbleweeds. They look gorgeous. I've only seen a picture of it, but wow.
Yeah. Lynette and I got together, together. I'm a Coloradoan and I have family here, so I come back often. And Lynette and I were together at her house up here, beautiful. And on the way back, we drove to Denver, where I was staying with my family. We drove through South Park, and it just kind of hit me. The Colorado in me hit me pretty hard there with the mountains and that open basin, just sort of prehistoric, just kind of hit me again, sort of revisiting that kind of thing. And that's where the tumbleweed against the fences kind of, that idea emerged. And then going forward, I also have some glass sculpture, cast glass, and that again was part of this kind of revelation. Traveling through South Park, I started thinking about the wind. You have to here in Colorado. It's significant. And I just remember from the olden days, my olden days living, living in Colorado, these crazy winds that were called Chinook. And so that was another, it all kind of came together but me being back home and experiencing Colorado again, really very passionately.
So you found tumbleweeds in South Park?
There's a lot of detritus that gets blown around there.
Huh, yeah.
Not your typical, there are different types of plants that get blown around. So that was the taking off point.
I've seen pictures of tumbleweeds bigger than cars.
Oh my goodness.
Out in Oklahoma and out on the plains.
They're like pictures online that are like tsunamis that have overtaken whole housing developments.
Huh. Wow.
But I kind of went off in the direction, I'm a sculptor, so everything with me is 3D, and I had been working with some bronze filaments, and when you shred like bronze screening, it has this kind of what I call the boing effect. So it goes wild, like Lynette's hair. Wong! And so that sort of fit also with the whole idea of nature and things happening.
I can't help but think of apocalypse when I think of tumbleweeds. Is there any sense of that?
Not for me.
No? What's your sense?
The sense is, this is a side story. I was like, back in Providence, Rhode Island, I really need to get my hands on a real tumbleweed. And I bought one online, and it arrives.
You bought a tumbleweed online?
You can get anything, a real tumbleweed. But there was no really
I'm going into that market.
You're right.
It's like pet rocks. First there were pet rocks, now there's tumbleweeds.
Well, I wanted to really see more about the structure of it. I mean, just for my head. And it's a thistle, so there wasn't much touching of that thing. They're just, as they tumble along, those seeds fall off, and that's how they reproduce.
Huh.
So I don't really think apocalypse. I suppose if you lived in that housing development.
Yeah, right. Overcome by a tsunami of tumbleweeds. Wendy, let's talk a little bit about your work in the show. I understand that you're an oil and watercolorist.
And printmaking. Yep.
Printmaking. So tell me about the work in the show that you did.
Well, they are prints, as
Okay.
a matter of fact.
Okay.
And they're a type of print called monotypes. So that's a painterly type of a print because I'm essentially a painter. So you create painting and however you put the ink on the plate, you create this one-of-a-kind print. So monotypes.
Oh, I see. Huh. With the theme that we're talking about here.
Well, the reason I fit into this group is that I am a Flatlander, okay, but I'm also quite a water girl. So I've always been really pulled and influenced and awed and inspired by water. So, I think there's a real synchronicity. I'm echoing what Lynette said about patterns, that the patterns created in water can often be reminiscent of patterns in clouds, because essentially wind is making some of that water movement pattern, and of course wind is a lot creating patterns in clouds. So you see kind of similar patterns. So the show's called CrossCurrents, so my currents are water currents.
Okay, so we have tumbleweeds and we have water, and Lynette, you are the clouds. So you've been watching clouds down in San Luis.
I have. My work has two different series, essentially. One is called Cielo, and those are the clouds that are done in oil paint. And they're a series of oil paint used almost like watercolor. It flows. I let it be very free. I have a second series of small works called Landsat 8, and those are taken from the Landsat 8 weather satellite. And those are inspired by the abstractions of viewing weather patterns from a great distance.
Oh, interesting. Huh. And that gets to synchronicity
It
a
does,
little bit.
doesn't it?
And, you know, when you mentioned that earlier, I was thinking that, what's that effect? The butterfly effect?
You named it. That is it. The small movement that creates a large effect. It is the butterfly effect, exactly.
Huh. And do you think that the times we're living in is kind of, are they more amenable to this kind of thinking?
I think so, and I'll tell you why. I think that, and I'm no scientist, so this is my view, but there's a lot of things in nature that you can break down scientifically. We were talking about this. There's the patterns of, for instance, a sunflower that form the Fibonacci series and that ratio of the golden mean, of which ratio I've forgotten. But dynamic systems, which are the the chaos theory, are much more complex, and as you probably know, apply to human behavior as well as nature. And people have been wanting to predict the weather and understand cloud and water systems for a long time, and it was pretty much, until about 20 years ago, it was accepted it was not understandable because it was too dynamic, too many variables. And I think we're living in that kind of time now as well, where it's difficult to find a grid or some way to put behaviors and the rapid rate of change into some kind of format that's understandable. And I think the chaos theory provides kind of I don't know if reassurance is the word, but again, that system that says, well, underlying it all are essentially fractals, which is just this small little spiral that keeps getting smaller or larger within the system. So it has its beauty. And as Einstein said he understood a theory or an equation was perfect because it was beautiful, because it was simple and beautiful. And I think beauty is sometimes a taboo word these days, but I find the chaos theory beautiful. But it also gives a kind of hope that when things just seem spinning out of control, that there is actually a scientific basis for some order in all of this.
Huh. Interesting. I wonder if, as you peruse those Landsat photographs, you began to see things that you didn't know were there before. Bigger patterns?
I think so.
And how did that affect your art?
I would say that the first thing of the Landsat series is honestly just their visual beauty. I couldn't help but respond to, as an artist, you work for a while and you I work against being predictable. I want to surprise myself. And looking at those photos from space, I would see a juxtaposition of a shape or a color that I would never think of putting there. So I have to say my first attraction was aesthetic. The other is somewhat daunting. You look at a forest fire, like the recent one that was in the Pacific Northwest, and you see from space, it's massive. It's absolutely massive. And so some of them might include the smoke or a volcano. But again, it's that idea of sort of macro-micro, that we're really close, but sometimes you need that broad view. Sometimes that, again, you see the patterns. And I find that beautiful and reassuring.
That underlying order under chaos puts me in mind of as above, so below.
Precisely.
And that's kind of what I'm hearing from what you're
I think
talking
for
about.
me, that's accurate.
Wendy, is that your take on things as you contemplate water? And
Well, I actually come at it from maybe a slightly different point of view, not about chaos theory, but I guess the thing that relates to that is that water is just so unknowable. It's so vast, and you can't control it. It has a mind of its own. The tides rise, the tides recede, and, there's no stopping any of that. The thing about water that really intrigues me is the infinite aspect of water, that it is something that takes you out to somewhere else, looking at the horizon, which is sort of, kind of like the desert too. Your eye travels, and it does take you out of yourself. So you get this feeling about the infinite, about it, the unknowableness of the infinite, kind of. And so what I'm doing in my work is contrasting that kind of unknowable thing with things that are concrete and knowable. So my work is combining something about the here and something about being grounded, as well as the infinite. So it's kind of like a paradox, kind of. So in my work, I'll often have a geometric shape imposed in the lower right, maybe part of the print, which might indicate something man-made or a structure, something with hard edges. And that's overlaid on top of these currents of water that, they just go, and your mind can free float with it, so to speak.
Huh.
So,
and
that's
Meris,
what
as you contemplate synchronicity and vagaries and flow and patterns and chaos.
Well, let me just give a shout out to Wendy and Lynette for being so articulate. Fractals. I said my boing theory, more down to earth. But, there's even just taking it down to our actual making of artwork. There's certain things you can't control. For me, for example, those tumbleweeds with the filaments of bronze, well, when I shred it goes in these spirals.
Huh.
I can only manage it somewhat. I kind of tackle it and amend it a little, but you still have to work with that underlying force. And I think when I look at Wendy's work as well with these monoprints, there's an unknown. You put down the paint, you may move it a little with different things. It's you can't have absolute control. I don't think so. And Lynette has been messing with some wax on her painting and scraping. You will not be able to predict exactly. I don't think any of us can predict exactly the outcome.
That's pretty exciting.
Well, that's the joy.
And
That's the
isn't
fun
that
of creativity.
What you're working for?
That is, to me, that's central to the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Is that there's some surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
The
going to take.
process is it. The process is what takes
It's
you
huge.
over.
It
And
does.
you give
Process.
yourself over to the process, and then you're just in it. And that's what's so wonderful
You
about
ride
what
the
we
wave.
do. You ride the wave. You
Now,
do.
have you... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to people listening, I may have an idea that artists have an idea, and it flows out exactly from your brain, through your arm, through your fingertips, and boing, it there. So it's perfect. That's not exactly it. I mean, I think that's what keeps us working and having fun and pleasure and excitement and the mystery.
And failures.
And failures are big. They're very important. I want people to know that, because I think, oh, you're an artist. I couldn't draw anything, but of course you could.
But,
You just-
somebody going to an art show opening are not going to see those failures, are they? I mean, that's the context, isn't it?
Well, you have just the result. You have the piece, and it stands on its own. You can't stand there and explain, oh, this happened, that happened. You're looking at something with your own reaction. I also just want to say, as a tribute to the three of us, that this show has a lot of synchronicity in it that also just kind of happened too. That because we think about similar things, about currents and things, when you go to see this show, you'll see that there's a definite conversation going on among our very disparate works. There's something, a thread,
Yes.
a current is running through all our work, and it was a little, more surprising to us than we realized.
Yeah, they
when we
live on
put
the
it
East
all up.
Coast, so we didn't see it
interesting.
all together until we hung it. And I love her word conversation, because when we leave, when everyone leaves that gallery and it's an empty space, those pieces relate and continue to relate to each other on their own.
Well, let's get to a few of the specifics before I let you ladies go. It sounds like a really interesting show.
Thank you.
It's happening tonight, the opening reception, starting at 6
At 6:00.
over at the Launchpad.
Yes.
And it hangs for how long?
It hangs for a month.
A month. Mm-hmm. And I understand this is the only show this year at the Launchpad that involves artists from outside the Valley.
It does, and as I understand also, I think this is accurate, they only accept, had to crawl for proposals, and it's one of the few that's a proposal they accepted, and it's individual artists.
That's because we're friends of Lynette.
Our revered
Power.
leader.
Well, all three of you have had numerous shows all over the place. How does this one rank in your own minds with those?
Well, I would just say because it's a 3-person show of the 3 of us that have, known each other over so many years, it's a different kind of a thing when you're showing with your friends. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, we've been having fun.
So,
I can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that comes through the microphone too. Yeah.
Good.
Well, the 3 of you, best of luck to you. Thank you for joining us on Express Yourself today, and good luck.
Thank you so much,
you.
Luke.